Welcome everyone to different digital products and services to consider offering as a small business. My name is Tracy Nyer and I'm the facilitator of today's webinar. Today's webinar is a production of the Virginia Small Business Development Center. The Virginia SBDC is a partnership program between the U.S. Small Business Administration, George Mason University, and local host institutions throughout Virginia. With 27 locations across the Commonwealth, we provide training and technical assistance to small businesses in their local community. Our counseling services are available at no charge. For more information and to schedule an appointment with your local center, go to the virginiasbdc.org website, and under locations, you can locate the place closest to you. Know that all of our counseling right now is online. We've moved virtually during this period of time, so we are still available, just we won't be doing it in our physical location. Today's webinar is presented by Ray Sidney-Smith. Many of you are familiar with Ray as he's been delivering the Virginia SBDC's Google and Beyond webinar series for the last several years. Ray is a digital marketing strategist and president of W3 Consulting. He's also the author of So Low Success, Social Media, Local and Mobile Marketing Small Business Strategy Explained, as well as a Google Small Business Advisor, Evernote Certified Consultant, and Hootsuite Global Brand Ambassador. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type those into the question window and Ray will do his best to answer them. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording today's webinar and we will post it and the slides on the Virginia SBDC website. If you have any questions, like I said, go ahead and post those in the question window and we'll answer those at the end of the presentation. Without further ado, here's Ray.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you to the Virginia SBDC and all the centers in Virginia for the work that you're doing, especially during this time. As Tracy said, now is the time to ask questions. I'm here, we're live, and if you're watching the recording, hi, you missed us. But here, while you're live, feel free to ask questions and we can hopefully help you as we go along. If you have a question afterward, if you are watching the replay and you have a question, feel free to go ahead and tweet at me at W3 Consulting. I am a Twitter fan, maybe fanatic, and hashtag it Road to Recovery, and I'll know that the context sort of, and I'll be happy to answer your questions there. Don't worry though, if you are not a Twitter fan, my email address will be on the final slide, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Just shoot me an email and I'll try to respond when I can. Of course, follow the Virginia SBDC. Their Facebook and Twitter and otherwise to keep up to date in regard to future programs and otherwise, as well as the local centers. So if you're following a local center's Facebook or Twitter or whatnot, follow and make sure you're paying attention to the new programs that are being put out, especially at this time. Okay, so with that, today's agenda is going to be just a quick discussion of what digital goods and services are. So we are all kind of on the same place, on the same plate. And then I want to talk about some of the considerations that we should use in determining whether or not a digital good or service should be developed for your business. That's, you have to filter out the chaff from the wheat so that you know which pieces are going to be good for you. And then I'm going to actually do a survey of those tools before we go into a survey of the types of tools that you can create, the types of goods and services that you can create before we go into question and answer. And we kind of talked about this before we started recording, which is that the questions I'd really like to hear from you all is that if you're having trouble understanding perhaps what type of product or service you might provide digitally, virtually, online, or otherwise, those are the types of questions I really want to be able to help you all with today. So if you're a type of business and you're just not grokking what you should be doing, then ask those questions and pose them to Tracy. And when we get to Q&A, I'll be happy to answer those questions. So with that, let's talk about the 2/3 of online purchases on the web. And those online purchases represent virtual goods, that is digital products and services. And this is a statistic that came out of Fiserv. Fiserv is a technology company for financial institutions. And what they really were trying to impress upon everyone in their key findings of a report that they published last year was that the bulk majority of online purchases are for virtual goods and services. That means that they are for products and services that are what we classify as digital goods and services. So what are digital goods and services? In essence, they're any product or service that is not physical, that is purchased online, purchased on the web. And the reality is that actually increases the number of digital goods and services that you might or not originally think about. So think of categories like Uber or Uber Eats or DoorDash or those kinds of things. Since all of the economics of what's going on, the purchase and everything else is taken place online, that is considered in the class of digital goods and services. I'm not going to really talk about those very much, but we will talk about the considerations of having a physical space or physical retail or service or product store, and what you want to really consider in navigating between those two. So any non-physical good or service that's provided on the web is considered a digital good or digital service. Pretty simple, right? So what are some of the major considerations for consumers? And what I wanted to talk about very quickly was just a couple of things. One is in that Fiserv study, they talked about the fact that digital goods and services, the purchase rates really depend upon the region. So while we're talking specifically about Virginia, if you satisfy or serve folks in other regions or different parts of the state, you really need to pay attention to whether or not a part of the state or another part of the state is going to be more open or willing to purchasing from you. So just keep that in mind, as well as the fact that once someone has had a poor experience with you online, it's very unlikely for them to purchase again from you. So, and I mean all told, that means your physical or digital space. So this is not an opportunity to lower any standards because you're selling online, so to speak, and there's a bit of anonymity to the experience for the consumer. And potentially as for you as a business owner. Do not think about it that way. This is an intimate technology where you are coming into contact with people, and their contact with your brand is virtually the same, pun intended. And you need to pay attention to the fact that if I have a bad experience with your business online, I'm gonna perceive that as a bad experience all told with your business and not think about working with you again in the future. Okay, so. The three main considerations for consumers going forward, again, this is pulling from the key findings from the Fiserv report, was one, price. So consumers really determined whether or not they were going to buy based on price. And considering that you're thinking about digital goods and services, really think about how your services or products or goods are priced against others online. And it's very easy to find that out today. I can just Google it. I can go to different platforms and find out what pricing is. So this whole notion of having a product priced for one group of audience publicly in one place and priced publicly for another audience in another place can sometimes work against you, but I wouldn't worry so much about that. Next up is security. Remarkably, consumers are very conscious of the security of their physical self. That is, if I'm going to order something for delivery, if you have to bring that thing into my home, then there's a physical safety issue. I don't necessarily know who you are, and if I don't trust you to walk into my home, potentially for theft, assault, all kinds of things, you need to be conscious of that because people are conscious of their physical space and protecting it. But now, even further now with the COVID-19 pandemic, now people are worried about just contact in general, people coming into their physical spaces because it may transmit to their family something that they don't want, okay? So just be very conscious that a major consideration for them is security, and that includes safety of both the employee, but also the consumer who's receiving the goods or services. And then finally is payment options. And this just allowed me to play with emojis. But the reality is that it's not just about different types of currency. We're talking about different forms of payments. And I've talked about this in past webinars, but the more options you give to people within the options that they want, right? So if I'm in the older crowd and I use checks and I want to be able to continue to use bank drafts and ECF payments, give me those payments if I'm your target audience. If I'm a younger audience or a more tech-savvy audience and I have Google Pay, Android Pay, or some other type of mobile payment platform, give me those options. Do not limit payment options for the people you're trying to reach, because if you don't give them the payment options, they're going to bail and go someplace else where they can spend their money with a platform that is letting them take their money the way they want to give it. Okay, so really be conscious of that. Many people just don't realize that, oh, you know what, if I'm an Amazon user and I have money in my Amazon account, and that seems like funny money to me, it doesn't seem like real money in my bank account, it's money I have to use because it's in Amazon, then I'm much more likely to spend those dollars than I would otherwise. It's kind of like gift certificates and gift cards. You know, you get a prepaid gift card as a rebate from something that you paid for. That money that you received on it is kind of like a gift card as well. You're much more likely to spend those funds because they're not in your real bank account. So think about how you give people payment options and can increase, volume of sales by virtue of options for payment. Okay, so I just wanted to cover those pieces in the Fiserv report because I think these are all really good considerations as we approach options for digital goods and services. Now, let's talk about some of the considerations we need to make as it relates to getting to digital goods and services. And I just wanted to cover these briefly, but there are several of them, many of them, and I wanted to make sure we cover those pieces because they're really important as you start to make a decision about what types of digital goods and services you would even provide as a small business. So first and foremost is that we are now in a period where you may need to be transitioning. Your maybe physical retail space is shut down, and maybe even your office is shut down and you don't even see clients normally, but because your employees are distributed or you are the employee and you can't go to the office, you are not sure what's going to happen with regard to the business. That's now, but you need to start thinking about the future when things go back to being the way they are. I'm hearing a lot of clients come to me and say, okay, well, I'm just not going back. I'm gonna shut down the store and I'm going to do some kind of virtual X. I'm gonna provide a digital good and service. And then I have to give them the tough news that, is your virtual service really wanted after everybody goes back to work? Are you really future-proofed? And you need to think about that. In your particular situation, everybody has to take this into account, but you may not actually have a digital good or service that someone wants once we go back. And you need to consider that as you move your way forward. And this has a lot to do with regionality, culture, and the market in which you're trying to market those products and services, right? We can always think, oh, well, I'm online, so I can sell to anyone and anywhere. But not all businesses are designed around that, and some of your services are potentially specific to a region, maybe because of licensing or some other kind of regulatory issue. So make sure what you're selling, you can actually sell now and into the future, and that will help you kind of reduce the number of options that are available. Next up is contactless and low contact delivery. One easy way to do what you do now is that if you provide a good or service and you implement e-commerce on your website or on a different e-commerce platform, really consider whether or not contactless or low contact delivery will increase your opportunities. And this is happening quite a lot. I'm talking to clients and they're saying, okay, well, yeah, I can totally do local delivery. We can get drivers and all those other kinds of things. And one of the missing elements is, yes, now everybody's doing all of the work with you online. They're going to your store online. They are purchasing online, but they're not very comfortable with seeing your bright, sunny face up close. They want distance, and so we should really think about how do we do this. I've recently been hearing from clients who deliver food or other kinds of products. Mother's Day is coming up, and delivering flowers. There's not only supply chain issues, right? Because getting flowers to folks is difficult, but on the other side is what do you do with the flowers? Do you set them outside the front door, like Amazon or other kinds of services that just put it outside the door? Do you have to have it signed for? There are legal ramifications to getting someone to sign a document or otherwise. And in those cases, you may need to add some additional delivery mechanisms there where people sign using a digital signing tool. They then receive the goods or services in some secure, contacted way, contactless or low contact way, and then then the person delivering can verify the signature digitally and otherwise. So just keep in mind that there are a lot of different pieces of that puzzle there, that when you want to be able to have, say, a bill of lading signed or some other kind of delivery mechanism that requires a signature, like if you're delivering sensitive or biohazardous materials, all those types of things. We have to consider those as we're going into the digital goods space, because those things can happen online, but there's just a level of workflow and logistics that need to be considered. Okay, next is profit margin. Sometimes providing some goods and services through your online store just may not be profitable, and we need to consider if you're going to host a new platform. If you're going to have to maintain that platform, say you're going to develop a mobile app, which we'll talk about a little bit later, you have to host and maintain that, and there's a time investment in getting that all set up and running. Plus, you may need to upskill or reskill in order to be able to do that, or upskill and or reskill your staff. Your employees may need to be working and managing in these systems, and that's going to require some thought process in terms of ongoing. If this platform changes every 6 weeks and we need to train the staff on how to use that effectively every 6 weeks, is that really profitable once we do the dollars and cents on it? So really start to consider some of the ramifications of doing this work online and whether or not the digital good or service is going to really be profitable. That doesn't mean all told you don't do it at all, but just consider maybe we need to do more of one thing and less of another, because that will impact our ultimate profitability. Now, there's always the case of, well, we can raise prices, which is, again, noticed major consumer indicator number one, is major consideration number one for consumers was price. So you have to be conscious of profit margin there, because there is a price cap against your own competition. But also the reality is that you want to be seen as a good value locally in your community, especially since they may not be able to come to you physically right now or in the future, short or long term, and you want to make sure that you're pricing it right. So there's some considerations there. Then, of course, there is the type of good or service you're providing. There are really three bundled categories of this. One is I'm downloading something. It's a digital good or item where I'm just downloading it once, downloading it maybe a few times, and then I have it. I kind of own that thing. Think of, if I own a pair of shoes, I own a pair of shoes, and if I own a pair of digital shoes, I own a pair of digital shoes, and I can save those on my computer. That's a download type business. Second is we have a term. This is typically how services are provided, which is to say I'm going to do some work for you for some period of time, and there are going to be metrics, deliverables associated with that, but I'm providing predominantly a service over the course of time, and then it ends. Okay, so it's a kind of a term or project-based digital good or service. Then we get to the ongoing access, and this really comes down to, am I going to have continuous ongoing access to that particular digital good or service? And we'll talk about some of those. And so those are the three different types of product types. And you can start to think about, okay, well, would what I'm providing be something that if you downloaded it once would be useful and practicable for someone to be able to find valuable enough to spend dollars on? And or would it be better if it was term-based or accessible on an ongoing basis? Maybe that ongoing basis does ultimately have a term, but you can think about it as ongoing or continuous access. Next are the tax implications. In certain states and countries, you are taxed on digital goods and services. So be mindful of that. In this presentation deck, I have a link to a TaxJar article that talks about sales tax that needs to be collected on these things by state in the U.S. here, and so you'll get access to those slides that Tracy will share with you. But be conscious of the fact that, going back to that profit margin issue, you think, oh, well, it's a digital good, so I'm not going to have to pay taxes. And then we recognize that, well, maybe in some states you will, and having to do all of that may cost enough money in labor to make it happen. Even if you use a service like TaxJar, you're still going to have to be conscious of how much that's going to cost and whether or not that makes your ultimate profitability positive or negative. Okay, next is intellectual property. You must understand that if I have your digital good, This is not like buying and go back to the pair of shoes, right? I buy a pair of shoes. I can't like put it inside of a Star Trek replicator. It is May the 4th. And so for you Star Wars fans, I'm sorry for making a Star Trek reference, but, but you know, I can't put my pair of shoes in a replicator or ask for a pair of shoes to be, come out of a replicator. The shoes are physical items and I now own a pair of shoes. But in the digital world, if Tracy emails me my pair of digital shoes, well, I now have a file. I could just copy the file. I can duplicate the file. And so there is some intellectual property that we need to think about, you know, the rights, ownership, access, and licensing of those various intellectual property that we are creating by virtue of that. And that also comes into play with the process, how you actually do things online, not just the files that are produced from it. So really think about, you know, both the tax and legal implications of digital goods and services. Next up is the decision between whether something is high value or low value. Just as a very simple mechanism, you can think that high value items, that means something that is priced at a higher dollar rate than something at a low value or low dollar rate, is going to have but higher quality, and it's going to have higher interaction. That means you're going to have, you know, greater access to the individual producing it than you would if you bought something low value. With low value, you're thinking about selling in large volumes. So it's a volume-based business, and it's understood that it's likely going to have low interaction. You're not going to have a lot of interaction with a business where you are, you know, producing at very high volumes and putting out something perceived as maybe valuable, but not necessarily high value. Okay, so keep that in mind. You might decide, you know what, I can churn out these smaller items online that people can purchase. And as long as I don't have to interact with the customer, that can be done through the web, through a customer service agent or otherwise, then my skills can be put to use really well, and therefore take advantage of that. Okay. Next is the e-commerce platform or the platform generally of choice that you ultimately choose. You need to really consider what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and many times you are limited by the platforms that are available to you. There are so many out there that, you know, you should really be able to find a way to do it. But just think about, okay, is the platform I'm currently using, can it do it? Do I need to change platforms? Do I need to add up onto the platform? Do I have to redevelop on top of another platform in order to give me those specific features? That platform choice is really, really important, because once you invest in a platform, you really don't want to change that often. Your consumer is going to feel, you know, weird if you're constantly having to move around and so on and so forth. And then, of course, next up, people are going to say, "But Ray, I can't sell this." You know, you create the digital good, you create the digital item, or you come up and devise the service, and you realize that your particular audience just isn't going to pay money for it. So what can you do? One, these might actually be really great things to give away for free. They may actually, if they're not future-proofed for now, maybe it's something that you can add on later, continue to do after the pandemic is kind of over and subsided, and it can be kind of a top of the funnel item. New potential customers, even you know, current and repeating customers can come back to this as a mechanism for being able to utilize that particular digital good or service, and that just helps you stay top of mind with those folks. Next up is lead nurture. So say you have someone who comes into contact with your business, but they're not yet ready to sell. Maybe this digital good or service can be something that keeps you in their mind's eye as they make their decision process, whether or not to work with your business or someone else's. So you could use this as lead nurture, right? Thinking, okay, well, maybe if I create this particular digital good, I can give it away, but only to people who are potentially going to buy from me. I'm not going to give it away to everybody. You know, anybody who just walks through the proverbial front door of my website or e-commerce store. I'm going to give it away to those select people at a unique time, at a particular time, to be able to remind them how good I am versus versus my other competitors. And then last but not least is you might decide to bundle the digital good or service with your current services. So if you are still capable of providing services, potentially it's at a reduced capacity right now because of supply side. Maybe it's because of reduced capacity because of retail issues, not being able to open up fully or having these social distancing policies in place. You can potentially use this digital good or service as a value add-on to make sure that people are still getting the value and paying you at the rate that you need to in order to stay profitable and to keep the business open and keep the doors open to your physical space. It may help to offset that cost by bundling those pieces together. So consider how value add-on can work. Okay, so if you can't sell it, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be providing digital goods and services, because then they can be used in all these other ways. Now, these are the options for digital goods and services that are pretty universal. The uniqueness of the product or service that you can provide online is, of course, to your making. It's you to make it your own. But these are generally the content types or the class types of options you have available. So let's start at the top, which is digital media. There's a whole class of digital media that I'm going to go over now. And these are really different types of either files or content that you can produce and sell. Okay. Now, we start off with just general content types. Now, don't limit yourself here, because there are a lot of you who could probably write a book. And if you don't think you could write a book, you could write a book. And I have seen many, many people who say to me, Ray, I wouldn't even know the beginning of it. Think about it from this perspective. Amazon considers a book a document, including its cover, that has 17 pages, okay? So you can write 17 pages of content and or buy some stock images. It's like writing a high school essay. large lines and some images well placed, and you can get to a longer document with some line spacing and otherwise if the document has value. Right? So it's not about the number of words, it's about the value provided. Okay, so you could write a book. You could write a book about your industry that is for colleagues. You can write a book for your customers and consumers that provides them a mechanism for being able to understand you as a subject matter expert, or providing content for them to be able to do it themselves. And if they can't do it themselves, then come to you for additional services. All kinds of reasons for being able to develop ebooks. This works in the nonfiction and fiction worlds. It can be a supplement to any of these other digital goods and services, by the way. So while I'm talking about options, do not limit yourself to one of these. You may decide, you know what, I'm going to do one of these and one of those, and this particular area of specialty that I have in business actually applies, but it only can really be done in a book versus being done as another type of media. So think about this as a series of options that you can check multiple boxes. There are multiple options here. Okay. Then there are e-guides. E-guides for me are like that 17 or 18 page concept, right? So if I'm going to upload something that's 17 or 18 pages to Amazon, I'm really not going to consider it a book. I'm going to call it probably an e-guide. You can call it whatever you want. It could be a workbook. It could be just a series of checklists that you put together. It can be a shorter case study that you've done with clients, but you can charge for these things. A lot of people don't realize that niche information is valuable, and sometimes valuable enough that people will pay for it. Even to this effect, you could have a guide on your website that you give away for free. When someone gives you their email address, they get signed up for your newsletter, and they get a lead capture. You get a lead capture value for them getting the e-guide, right? But on Amazon, since you're not collecting their email addresses, you could charge $1.99, $2.99, whatever you feel like the market will bear for that same e-guide, right? The price is them paying for it versus them giving up your email address. How much value is that email address to you in your own business? From a lead generation perspective, charge that dollar value for that e-guide on Amazon. or any one of the other platforms. There's so many platforms out there. And if you have a question about which platforms you might want to use, by all means, feel free to ask. There are worksheets and templates. So templates are not just about a worksheet that you fill out, or a template which is a guide to something. It could be text for something. So say that your process, the way in which you do something, can be replicated, and you could give a template for that process. By all means, create that digital good and sell it. You could also create templates that people can use for purposes of like copying and pasting into their own systems. Probably the easiest example is a set of swipe files. So swipe files are pre-created or created text. They're templates of text that you can copy and paste and use, say, in marketing, emails, social media posts, and otherwise. And so most people create swipe files for purposes of helping others market them. And you could do that in terms of, okay, well, if you've written all the marketing copy for your business, maybe there are other businesses around the country and potentially around the world who could benefit from that copy. So potentially think about bundling that together and selling that to, heck, your competition, but not just your competition locally. We're talking about, potentially all the people nationally who could benefit from your your intellectual property here that you've created. Next up is artwork. There are so many different types of artwork, you have no idea. It boggled my mind in researching this, the different types of things that come up in terms of artwork. And so I'm just giving you a few options here, but really anything that can be manifested in ones and zeros can be utilized in art, including like ASCII art. There's an artist who builds portraits from just ones and zeros and symbols and wingdings and whatever, and like produces huge full-scale portraits of people with text ASCII characters. Okay, so artwork just is, the sky's the limit in terms of those kinds of things. But think about it from this perspective. If you're a musician, or if you are some kind of mixed media artist, there's obviously a feeling of limitation to, you can't play in a venue right now. You can't have a gallery opening, but you can do these things virtually and sell your artwork in other media, that is digital media. So you can say to yourself, you know what? I can't sell paintings because people can't come to my gallery and paint them. You may open an online gallery where people can view them, create a nice virtual walkthrough. You can even do virtual tours where people come to your gallery virtually. You can walk around the gallery with them, or have staff that walk around the gallery with those folks so they can walk around and see the gallery and ultimately purchase, and then have potentially higher or lower dollar products that they can go ahead and purchase based on that. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But think about it from, if you're a graphic designer, you're capable of doing logos. If you are in a different kind of place, but you can still, different kind of field, but you can still do those things. Think about the 3D printing. There are services that allow you to 3D print products. And so you don't have to own a 3D printer. You just upload your design, and then you get the 3D printed items shipped to you from this warehouse with a bunch of 3D printers in them. Well, if you have some AutoCAD experience or some 3D modeling experience, you can create artwork and have that stuff produced and shipped directly to consumers from those places, drop ship from those locations. So you can create all kinds of other artwork, and then you can potentially even sell the CAD files so that people can purchase the CAD file and then upload it to whatever service they want to be able to produce the 3D printed items. So we have a lot of options in the artwork space. Okay. Next up is live streaming content. And that includes if you're going to do video online, if you're going to do internet radio, where you're having live broadcasts of things, and then live podcasts. And not to mince, but internet radio is a little bit different than podcasts, especially in the live streaming space. Internet radio typically has a programming schedule. It's usually around the clock, and you're providing multiple shows in the context of that 24-hour period. Podcasts are more like once a week, 2 times a week, something like that, and you are going live at a particular period of time and speaking to usually a smaller class of audience, but not necessarily. You could have a huge audience, and so on and so forth. The real distinction between this and what I'm going to talk about in a little bit, which are virtual events, is that in this particular case, you're usually paid by the platform or it's ad supported. So you're going to get paid by virtue of producing the content, but the content is not being purchased. It's in essence, people are purchasing access to your audience. So if you already have an audience, you have a great email list, and you want to be able to start bringing people into a live streaming content space, you can potentially do that through ad-supported revenues. Okay, next are the subscription side of the world. And subscriptions just mean recurring revenue. And I love subscription businesses. I think that the recurring revenue model is by far like the holy grail of small business ownership. If you can get someone to pay you money on a regular basis for a product or service, that's a good thing, right? So you really want to consider how subscriptions can be brought in, and there are a lot of different digital goods and services that you can provide. For example, you can actually have people pay for access to your email newsletter. Now, we're not talking about your marketing newsletter that you send out for purposes of getting people to stay informed about you and your business and some light content marketing. I'm talking about real, incisive, interesting information, and only information they could get from your particular subject matter expertise. There is a particular financial guru out there, if you want to call it that, but this guy, he puts out a newsletter. He puts it in a PDF format and emails out to his folks, but basically it's an email newsletter, and charges $200 a month for people to have access to that email newsletter. Okay, so in essence, he's like publishing a magazine once a month, and people are paying $200 a month to have access to this kind of information. Now, are you going to be able to charge that? I don't know, but the reality is that if you have 1,000 people on an email list, and they're each paying you $1 a month, $12 a year, that's still a really good amount of income, right? That's $5,000 a month. So minus processing fees and so on and so forth. Remember profit margins. But the reality is that you can start to scale up if you can get people to start paying. And honestly, if you get 20 people on an email list and they're paying $10 a month, that's an extra $200 a month that you weren't making before. So you can start to, as I'm trying to impress upon you, is that you can start to bundle some of these pieces together that as an aggregate, they then become something that becomes supporting revenue, either now, during this difficult time, or afterward as just another extension of the business. And now you have diversified revenues that are not just dependent upon local or, virtual business, but a combination of both of them. So email newsletter, there's a couple of tools out there, Substack and Review, that allow you to be able to do this, or you can do it manually, right? You can charge people and take them on and off the email list if you have a small enough audience where you can do that, or not that much change, right? If you get 1,000 people who want to subscribe to your newsletter, and they generally stay on, and only maybe 5 or 10 people change every month, it's not that big of a deal to go ahead and do that manually through your current invoicing or payment tool. And then you can just take them on and off when you need to. Next up are blogs and podcasts. There are actual tools that allow you to create premium or paid blogs. Again, this comes down to you have very, very high niche subject matter expertise in some space, and you want to be able to only allow those certain people to have access to it. I know a particular coach who he does personal development coaching, and his podcast is basically his coaching with his clients. And so he has thousands of these people who subscribe to his podcast. They use a platform called glow.fm, and you pay to have access to the podcast. So it shows up in your podcast feed just like any other podcast, but you're paying to have access to that podcast. It's not public anywhere else. It's only for the people who are paying for it. And now you get access to that content. Next up, digital goods and services that I mentioned are obviously another form of subscription. So in essence, you could have a service where you produce a piece of artwork every month, right, or some kind of thing every month, and those people who subscribed get it. So in essence, you just basically have people pay for an ongoing, access to the digital goods and services that they can then download, put on their social profiles, whatever it might be, to show that they've purchased it. You can kind of get the idea. But any of the digital goods and services mentioned, if you're creating it on a regular basis, you can create a book subscription, right? Produce an ebook once a quarter. People pay an ongoing recurring fee once a quarter, and they get access to that ebook. If they purchased one ebook, they're going to pay more money, right, than they would if they subscribe to it, and we're paying on an ongoing basis. So for paying a subscription, they're going to get a discount, meaning you have more tried and true regular income, and the individual gets a little bit of discount on each individual ebook, right? So that's the trade-off, and that's the value of being able to have these different types of products and services that you can provide digitally. Next up is you can just sell your current physical goods online. We've already talked about that. Your e-commerce platform, put it all online, put your inventory online, and think about the considerations of how people can now buy your goods and services online that they otherwise, in a non-subscription rate, have to buy on a regular basis. Amazon has pretty much, fine-tuned this with their subscribe and save platform. So I think I've said this before. I subscribe to Amazon Subscribe and Save for my shampoo. It shows up every 3 months. It's the same shampoo all the time. I never think about it, right? And so am I without paper towels or toilet paper during this time? No, because Amazon Subscribe and Save delivered it for me without me ever having to think about it. How can your business take advantage of that also, so that people feel the comfort and stability of being able to say, you know what? I love this lotion from this particular local store, and I want to make sure that they stay in business. Well, I'll subscribe to their lotion service, and so every month I'll get a new lotion that'll show up in a nice box, and then I will have that lotion that I want every month, and I don't have to worry about going to the store. I still love them, I still refer them, and all those good things, but I still can get my products without having to worry about other factors. And it's recurring revenue. Okay, next up is the advertising or influence campaigns issue. So this comes into play, again, if you have an audience and you want to be able to establish a presence online that's paying you, you can do something like influence campaigns. But on the advertising side, I actually mean this on the flip side of that, which is that if you have a blog, a website, or otherwise, let's say you have an email newsletter, now you are actually selling ad space on the properties in which you exist. And that's one thing that people can and do, where they will, in essence, open up their existing space. They'll put ads on the sides of their cars, in the physical world. We're basically doing that in the digital space. So if you do have a website and it's well trafficked, you get a couple hundred or a couple thousand people who visit a month, and you have another local business or an international business or a national business that wants to get in front of that very niche audience that's going to your website, then you can potentially sell advertising to them for that. Okay, so just give that some consideration. Influence campaigns are for those who are influencers. So if you have persuasive power over your audience, then you can do that. So again, that comes into branded sponsorship and other kinds of campaigns where you are telling people about other people's products, and those businesses, those larger brands, are paying you for that. And it doesn't necessarily mean larger brands, but any brand. So say, for example, I'm a real estate agent, and I work with a series of other home goods stores locally. Maybe someone who makes custom wood furniture, someone who makes really beautiful artwork, and so on and so forth. I can do an influence campaign where I go to my past and current followers, and I talk to them about this really great craftsman who makes this beautiful wood furniture, in the hopes that they purchase his or her goods and wares, right? So that's the influence campaign space, but it's advertising dollars. You're getting paid for that, giving exposure to that other person. Next up is digital merchandise, and people giggle when I talk about this, but this is real. Okay, so one is that you can create digital branded stuff. Okay, and this can come into a whole wide variety of things, but digital stickers, digital badges, for example, are a real thing. That is, people pay for certifications of things. So if you are of a particular level of expert where you can certify that someone has something, or if you have access or licensing to certify someone in something, you can do what's called a digital badge or a digital sticker. Digital badges are a type of certification, though, and the certification is tied to technology that, in essence, certifies online by someone clicking on a link or some kind of web page where you can punch in a code and determine that that badge that's being displayed for that person is legitimate. Okay, it's kind of like the licensing, corporate, regulatory affairs licensing office for different professions. So it's like the bar association for attorneys or medical board for doctors. This is the digital equivalent of that, and you can actually sell these digital badges through a certification, right? So someone does a certification process with you, and if they want to have a digital badge, they can go ahead and do that. Okay, that's one side of this. Then we get into the whole kinds of what this exists category, and that is virtual goods and virtual money, like literal currency and how that all works. Now, I can't get into the financial, legal, and otherwise implications of producing virtual money, but virtual goods are actually something that people frequently purchase in games. They're becoming more available in other platforms, but there are literal platforms like the one I'm about to show you. It's called Loot Hunt. I kid you not. It is a platform where people can buy and sell stuff for games. So it's a whole platform, and the whole idea is for people to be able to buy things that they can wear, buy things that they can put in their games. And so this is the kind of thing where you don't probably come across this all that often, but there's a huge gaming community in the world. Obviously, there's a young crowd, youth gaming community. There's an adult gaming community, and so your business may just lend well to this idea of being able to sell virtual items. So people are paying real money for virtual goods and services, and one of those virtual goods could be T-shirts and special weapons and all kinds of things in these environments. So just give that some consideration as you're making your way through in terms of ideas. It's not for everybody, but just know that they exist. Okay. So virtual goods and services, virtual money. There are actually a whole class of virtual monies out there. Most people know about Bitcoin and other kinds of things. Virtual, what they call cryptocurrencies, are capable of being made, and depending upon the industry, you could actually create your own cryptocurrency for purposes of sale. And so on and so forth. Again, I'm not going to get into that today, but just know it does exist. There are cryptocurrencies out there, and there are cryptocurrency platforms on which you can actually, design your own cryptocurrency and sell that cryptocurrency for different purposes. So, say you're trying to fund a new business, you could potentially sell that cryptocurrency as a part of the initial offering. And there's lots of SEC and other kinds of regulatory hurdles to get over to get to that point. But there are companies out there that do something like that. Look at republic.co for that kind of stuff. Okay. Next up are, as I talked about at the beginning, there's kind of like the live streaming content where you're paying for access to content that's being produced. But then on the other side are tickets to virtual events. These could be webinars, virtual classes, networking events. They could be full conferences, all kinds of things. And these can be low value, low dollar items, and high value, high dollar items to sell online. So if you are, again, someone who provides a service and you think that you can sell those things in a virtual space with just some additional technology, I am hearing a lot of yoga studios, fitness studios, anyone who does coaching, anyone who provides those kinds of services that can be translated into me helping you in physical space, but I don't actually need to, I'm not like a chiropractor where I'm physically manipulating your body. I'm just there to help you, know how to do things correctly. That could be a place where you could host some virtual fitness classes or virtual consultations or virtual, events that help to educate people and help to consult them and advise them in a way that's not in person. So you can, if you, had a networking business before where you got people together for referrals and met in person once a week, you could do networking events. There are a lot of different options there where you can have people buy online what they would once otherwise do offline. All you have to do is think about the experience of doing something online. We talked about this in the e-commerce webinar, right? Think about it from this perspective. If I walked into a physical space, what are the things that I would experience, and how can we translate those to virtual so that I get, if not the same experience, the same outcomes from them? Okay, next up is access to digital community platforms. This is a very simple model. You create a digital community and you sell access to that digital community on an ongoing basis. This could be in the form of a mastermind group. So say your audience needs some help on an ongoing basis. Well, there's yeah, sure, I can hold an event and teach you how to do something or teach you one-to-one how to do something, but there's a value to me meeting and working with a group of people in addition to yourself, right? So if I'm an artist and I want to be able to learn how to do art, yes, you might be an artist and the community host for this group of artists, but the value is actually me being among other artists who can also help me along that road. So think about digital community platforms where you can do that. There's just so many out there, and that is platforms for this, and it's not just like I'm going to leave Facebook and do that. You can actually, if you build the community on Facebook, you can actually have people pay to have access to a Facebook group. So you can actually create branded Facebook groups that are paid for people to be able to access and enjoy access to the group of people that are together, right? So it's not just about the name of the event and going to the event for the information. It's about the people in the room that are going to be there, and how do I make that a long-term ongoing experience. Next is interactive media, and this really comes down to kind of a higher level of sophistication, if you want to call it that. But if you want to be able to have if you have the ability, you can create games. So there are tools out there that let you create games. There are game designers out there. Actually, my older brother went to school for video game design, remarkably enough. It's an actual degree program. He is not a video game designer, go figure, today. But there is such a degree, and so you can actually hire interactive media designers and game designers who can develop a game for you if your business that applies to your business. Tools, something as simple as a quiz can be sold. So if you help me understand through a survey or some kind of mechanism information about myself through that, you could sell that online. Don't think that's capable. Think about therapists. Therapists have these things called inventories. Inventories are basically a questionnaire, and they charge lots of money for people to have those inventories done for HR purposes, for other kinds of things. If anyone has ever been proctored for the Myers-Briggs personality type indicator, that's just basically a quiz, and they're getting paid to be able to do all the work around it, right? They're helping you understand the tool, they're helping interpret it potentially afterward, but in essence, you're creating some kind of tool for people to be able to use that could be as simple as a quiz or very complicated and multi-part, but it's all interactive media. Then, of course, there are apps, and there are app platforms that I've talked about before. Look at Appy Pie, and look at the other tools that are out there that allow you to be able to pay for an app one time, right? I just download your app from the App Store or Android Store or through a progressive web app, or I can subscribe to the app, and by subscribing, I'm paying you on an ongoing basis, and that's what gives me access to that game, tool, or app into the future. Next are digital courses. So this comes into play if you are, again, you have some kind of expertise and you want to be able to share that with someone in either a real-time, day-by-day, week-by-week capacity, right? So we're walking through kind of like a masterclass, or in a self-study perspective where they get all the tools to be able to learn and do the development work themselves. Maybe you check in once a week and look at their materials and correct them and answer questions and so on and so forth. But the nature of it is that they are doing the learning process of, instead of being in a classroom, they're going to be in an online environment where they take this course either individually or as a whole group, right? So there's that community platform element of it that you can have as well. Next up is software or software as a service. I'm not going to get too far into this because you get the idea. You can develop your own software and sell that software. And this really comes down to the effect that if you are and have the expertise and the wherewithal to build that software, you can go ahead and do that. Where I have that ability in-house. And so I'm talking to folks, and we're in the process of developing a piece of software that we hope to be able to provide our clients. And that's been an ongoing project and something that we were going to do anyway. But this has accelerated that desire, because we have the ability to do that. Now, you can, of course, go out there and find software designers, software developers, and say, hey, go to Upwork and license someone to be able to build the software that you want to be able to provide to customers. And that's what you would normally provide in a physical space, maybe, but now you can provide that online, virtually, or through, say, an app. You can then, have that software developed into a mobile application that people can use in addition to either through the web or download it onto a desktop device. And of course, then people are going to say, but Ray, you have a coder for a brother, and you have, you have software experience, and you're capable of doing this stuff, but I can't code. Never fear. There is literally an entire movement called the no-code movement. In this slide that you'll get access to, there is a list of two websites where you can go to those two sites, and if you click on both of those links and search for pretty much anything you're trying to create, there is likely a piece of software that will allow you to build that software without you having to learn a stitch of code. Okay, so do not think because you don't have coding experience you can't do this. Now, is that to say that you shouldn't reskill or upskill? No, because at some point you may decide that you want to build something bespoke, custom, and you're going to hit a limit, right? But for an MVP and to get out the gate right now during this time when you need to be able to build a business and grow beyond this, don't worry about it. Go to no code and figure out what you can build and start providing to customers as soon as possible, okay? Of course, if you can't build it, then you can always license it and resell it. And the ideas behind that are, in an affiliate environment, you are sending people to a particular business that already has the software, and they're going to pay you a commission for people that you send to them. Then, of course, there's a reseller type model where, in essence, you act as the party with which they're buying those services, and the software in the background is providing the services to those parties underneath kind of your umbrella. It's a bit of a shielded solution where I'm acting as the person you're interacting with, but you're getting services provided by someone else. Like any other reseller environment offline, it's just that kind of environment online, but it's usually a little bit more sophisticated because people are interacting with a website or otherwise that is front end, it looks like you, but on the back end, it's handled by someone else. And then there are templates to close us out, which are, in essence, a lot of software out there that is difficult to use, or you have set it up already. So say, for example, you have a restaurant business and you have gone through the process of setting up this really sweet Infusionsoft, which is now Keep set of funnels. And you're like, you know what? These are the best funnels. They're working so well for us. They're really bringing in some high dollar reservations and so on and so forth. Well, there's probably some other restaurant out there that could use and benefit from you exporting your model for how this worked and selling those as templates. Okay, so that's what I mean, is taking the pieces of what you've done and selling those pieces to other folks. Now, this comes into a whole nother paradigm, which is kind of consulting and setup and training. So if you can't sell templates, then you may actually be able to use what you've learned from the software and actually teach other businesses like yours in other areas how to set up and then train their staff and how to use those pieces as well. I did want to just throw this last item in here as a bonus, which is the idea of a streamlined virtual service. And I'll use the example of a colleague of mine who is a professional organizer. And so hats off to Penny Catterall. And so Penny has been providing professional organizing services to her clients in person and meeting with them in person. And through this situation, she just very quickly realized that she could actually not have to go into people's homes and be able to still provide that level of care and support necessary to help people get organized in their homes and offices without her actually having to be there. And so just using virtual video meeting software, she's now able to go into their homes and environments. She doesn't have to worry about, rummaging around in people's actual stuff, and having to deal with people's physical clutter. She can actually do that from afar. She can meet with them face to face through video and still provide her services. So she went from being a professional organizer to being a virtual professional organizer. Can you do that with your services and handle all of that stuff digitally? If you can, then you can create this kind of streamlined virtual service. So I just think that there are so many options out there for people to be able to do digital goods and services today. I'm hopeful that you found an option among the many options that I talked about, and I'll turn it over to Tracy for Q&A.
Wow, Ray, thanks. You've given us a lot to think about. I am going to go ahead and close out the webinar because we're right at 2 o'clock, so much information. And then I will stay around and we can ask those questions. But for those of you who've got someplace else to be at 2, I want to respect your time. And thank you all for participating today. Today's webinar was recorded and it'll be posted on the virginiasbdc.org website. Along with any of the other webinars that we have been providing over the last few weeks. You can also find those archived there. On Thursday, Colin Spence will be with us presenting, Do You Have a Sales Plan to Grow After COVID-19? And I encourage you, as Ray said, continue to follow the Virginia SBDC or your local SBDC centers. Check out their websites for the additional trainings that we'll offer as we all learn to navigate doing business in this new environment. So let me get to the questions. I'm a new startup and planning to offer domain and hosting overseas. Any recommendations?
Yeah, so there are many different providers. It depends on what you're trying to host. If you're going for higher level VPS, then I would look at probably looking at some of the higher level hosts out there, like DigitalOcean, or looking at Google Cloud and those kinds of things, and potentially reselling, on top of those platforms, as opposed to going to a lower level. Of course, there are many other reseller programs out there. GoDaddy has a very sophisticated reseller program, and then there's Flywheel if you're doing WordPress hosting, Kinsta also for WordPress hosting. So there are a lot of different options that are out there. What I find probably most advantageous is the fact that you can be a part of many different programs and therefore sell the services that your clients actually need. And so you may actually end up reselling multiple, being either an affiliate or reseller to multiple different hosting services, and then using a front end reseller program. They're actually software, in essence, to help you bill and manage other reseller programs. So, say you sell multiple different types of tools, you can charge your clients one fee up front, and then that will automatically do all of the billing and so on and so forth in the background for you. So they're interacting and engaging with you through one interface, but accessing all of the software and services through this other service that's basically managing license and payment and so on and so forth. So I would look at one of those tools, and forgive me, the tools don't come to mind right now, but I can put you in touch with some of the folks who are producing that software.
Great. We have a question about the actual names of the no-code websites, and then one of the participants wanted to point out that there's some risk involved with using prepackaged coding, that when you make changes, you could break that code.
So not in the no-code space. Obviously, anything, yeah, sure. If you were to download, say, an open source tool and start messing around in the code, there's obviously always risk. Actually, there's risk across the board. There's risk in opening your front door in the day, right? So we all have to take some level of risk and know what risks you're taking when you enter into those things. So I'm not at all disclaiming that there aren't risks, but the point in today is that there are options out there, and to go look at the options, do the due diligence necessary so that you can understand those risks, but also look at the opportunities. Don't close yourself off from an opportunity because you think that there are so many risks that it's not going to be worthwhile. There are likely some risks, but they are far outweighed once you start to educate yourself about the opportunities that are there. As to the names, I literally said it, which is no code. So it's called no code. I don't really know it as anything else. As I said, the links are in there. They're like different websites. So, but there are two specific ones that I put into the slides, and I only know them as no code. So I think one's like no code list and no code tech or something like that, but they're just no code. They're just no code to me.
and we'll get these slides out right after the presentation.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I think, Ray, actually that is all of our questions for today.
Fantastic.
So fantastic presentation. Thank you all. I hope to see you on future webinars.